I've walked into companies that look perfect on the outside, the kind where everything smells like success. Clean, polished, structured, strategy on the walls, plants that never die, cheerful posters about teamwork, and open-door policies no one actually uses. And still, after just 10 minutes in the room, I felt it. That invisible pressure. The kind that doesn't scream at you. It sits in your stomach, low and quiet, like something's off, but you can't quite explain why. You don't hear it. You feel it. You feel it in how people say hello. You feel it in the way meetings begin. And most of all, you feel it in the silence after someone speaks up. And here's the thing that still makes me angry. Not angry at the people working there, but at the leaders who created it. Because the people inside those companies, most of them think they're the problem. They think they're too sensitive, too difficult, too much. I've spoken with people who used to love their work. People who came in bright-eyed and full of ideas. 6 months later, they're second-guessing every word they say. They write an email and rewrite it 10 times just to make sure no one could possibly be offended. They speak in meetings and then spend hours wondering if they said too much. Or worse, they stop speaking altogether. You don't need to raise your voice to create a toxic environment. You just have to build a culture where people don't feel safe, where they're always being watched, where they get feedback that sounds like concern but feels like shame, where they're told they can speak freely but punished when they do, where the official message is, we support you, but the unspoken truth is, don't make things uncomfortable. And in those cultures, the people who care the most are the ones who suffer first, the ones who ask questions, the ones who try to improve things, the ones who feel deeply and think long-term. They're the first to burn out, not because they're weak, but because they refuse to become numb. And what breaks my heart is that these people, these smart, passionate, loyal employees, don't leave immediately. They stay, they try, they take courses, go to coaching, try to become more resilient. They think maybe if they just improve themselves, they'll finally be able to thrive. But you can't grow roots in poisoned soil. And if you've ever sat at your desk, exhausted not from the workload, but from pretending all day, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's not you being dramatic. That's your nervous system telling you the truth. The problem isn't always obvious. It's not always abuse or yelling or chaos. Sometimes it's just a slow, quiet erosion of trust. A leader who plays favorites. A manager who never listens unless there's something in it for them. A team culture that's polite on the surface but cold underneath. Or worst of all, a company that constantly talks about values but never lives them. I've seen companies where the walls are full of words like transparency, respect, and growth, while the people inside are afraid to take a single risk or say what they really think. That kind of gap between message and reality, that's not just disappointing, it's toxic. And it doesn't start with bad people. Most of the time it starts with good people who are never held accountable for the environment they created. Owners who care more about revenue than human energy. Managers who climb the ladder by keeping their heads down and their hearts out. Leaders who inherited power but never learned presence. And because no one ever tells them the truth, because everyone's too afraid to challenge them, they genuinely believe they're doing great. Until people start leaving, quietly, and then suddenly. So if you're watching this, and you've been wondering whether you're the problem, you're not. If you feel tired all the time but can't explain why, if you used to speak up but now stay quiet, if you feel like you have to perform instead of just be yourself, then what you're feeling is real. And it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're awake. You're picking up on something your leadership refuses to see. And maybe you're the only one brave enough to name it. But naming it is just the start. Sometimes people don't even realize they're in it. The toxic environment doesn't always look like chaos or cruelty. Sometimes it just feels like exhaustion, a slow, creeping kind of fatigue that doesn't go away after a weekend off. You start the week already tired, already tense, and you begin to think, maybe it's just you. Maybe you're not strong enough. Maybe your standards are too high. Maybe you're too emotional, too sensitive, too something. That's how it gets in. Not by screaming, but by making you doubt your own sanity. One of the first things that changes in these places is the way people communicate. Or stop communicating. Information becomes a game of power. Teams work in silos. Departments don't speak unless forced. Everyone's doing their own thing, blaming each other when things go wrong, never really understanding what the others are up against. It's every man for himself and God for the quarterly results. You don't ask too many questions because you don't want to be seen as difficult. You don't speak too openly because last time you did, someone used it against you. So you play it safe. And slowly, you stop talking. But it's not just about what's said. It's about who's included. People form cliques, inner circles, unwritten rules about who's in and who's out. Sometimes it's subtle. A lunch invite that never comes. A meeting you're not included in. A joke that isn't meant for you. Other times it's colder. Direct exclusion. Gossip disguised as feedback. People judge not for their work, but for not fitting the mold. And what hurts most is when others see it happen and say nothing. Because silence is safer than solidarity. Then there's the leadership, or the illusion of it. The manager who demands trust but never earns it. The owner who thinks culture means a football table and Friday beers. The executive who talks about transparency but disappears when things get hard. You want to believe in them. You want to follow. But it's hard to follow someone who never turns around to check if anyone's still with them. Leadership isn't about charisma or confidence. It's about presence. And in toxic places, the only thing worse than a controlling leader is one who's never really there at all. And you start to notice something in your colleagues, or maybe in yourself. That spark, gone. That energy to go the extra mile, not worth it anymore. People who used to be creative, engaged, generous with their time and ideas, now just going through the motions. Not lazy, not disloyal, just done. Because when you work in a place that doesn't value what you bring, eventually you bring less. Not out of spite, out of survival. Innovation becomes a risk. Suggesting something new feels like stepping on glass. You've been told too many times that this is how we do it. So you keep your ideas to yourself. You stop asking questions. You stop raising your hand, and when others do speak up, you watch them get ignored or shut down or labeled difficult, and you think, no thanks. Better to stay quiet and stay safe. And so the culture flattens, becomes predictable, becomes stale. Nothing grows where nothing's allowed to change. High turnover is dismissed as coincidence. People move on. They weren't a fit. But when talented, capable, passionate people keep leaving, it's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. One that leadership refuses to look at. Because looking at it would mean accepting responsibility. And for some, that's harder than losing yet another great team member. For the ones who stay, life doesn't get easier. It gets heavier. More work, more pressure, fewer people to lean on. And the idea of balance becomes laughable. You're expected to give everything all the time. Your inbox doesn't sleep, and neither do you. And if you dare to leave on time or protect your weekend, you're seen as someone who's not committed enough. You tell yourself you're just going through a rough patch. But months go by, nothing changes, and your body starts to notice headaches, fatigue, illness that seems to stick. Your system breaks down, not because you're weak, but because it's been fighting for too long. And when you finally call in sick, they say, take your time. But you know how the story goes. The moment you're out, the gossip starts. The trust fades. And returning feels like walking into a courtroom, not a workplace. And maybe worst of all is the feeling you can't quite explain. The one your gut keeps whispering. You don't feel safe. You don't feel seen. You don't feel like yourself anymore. And still, you hesitate to leave because part of you hopes it'll get better, that they'll finally see you, that maybe if you just push a little harder, it'll be enough. But deep down you already know the truth. And the truth is, it's not about you. It never was. There's a moment that comes for almost everyone. Sometimes it's during a meeting. Sometimes it's on a Thursday night when you're staring at your laptop long after you were supposed to be off. Sometimes it hits when you realize you've been quiet for too long, or when someone says something small, and it breaks you, not because of what they said, but because of everything that came before it. That's the moment. The moment you stop trying to manage it. The moment you say to yourself, quietly but clearly, this isn't working. And when that moment comes, it doesn't mean you failed. It means you finally started listening. Not to the company, not to your boss, not to the culture, but to yourself. You realize you've been adapting to dysfunction. You've been making yourself smaller so others could stay comfortable. You've been carrying the cost of someone else's lack of leadership. And somewhere deep down you know, no amount of yoga, resilience training, or mindfulness apps can fix what's broken at the root. But not every toxic culture is the same. And not everyone deserves the same reaction. Some are simply lost, in transition, in panic, in survival mode. They can be helped, changed, repaired, but others are dangerous. And for those, the most courageous thing you can do is walk away. If you're being intimidated, if your voice is met with threat, if your questions are punished, if your boundaries are ignored, it's time to go. That's not tension, that's abuse. And no paycheck is worth sacrificing your dignity. If there's sexual misconduct, jokes that cross the line, touches that don't belong, comments that make your skin crawl, don't minimize it. Don't justify it. Don't tell yourself it's not that bad. It is. And if the company does nothing when you report it, then it's not just one person. It's the system. If you're facing discrimination for who you are, what you believe, what you look like, how you live, and it's real, and it's repeated, and it's ignored, then you owe it to yourself to leave. And if you're not sure if it's serious enough, ask yourself, would I want someone I love to work here? But even outside of those extremes, there's another kind of danger. The slow kind. The kind that tells you to be grateful you have a job. The kind that makes you feel dramatic for being exhausted. The kind that praises you for your loyalty, while draining you until there's nothing left to give. And that kind convinces you to stay too long. You don't owe a company your well-being. You don't owe your silence. You don't owe anyone your burnout. What you owe is to yourself, to your future, your health, your sense of self. And leaving doesn't make you a quitter. It makes you someone who remembers their worth more than survival. And if you're a leader watching this, someone with real influence, someone who shapes the culture others have to live in, then ask yourself the hardest question of all. what part of this might be mine? Not out of guilt, not to blame yourself for everything, but because real leadership starts where ego ends. What would it take to build a place where people feel safe again? Where people aren't afraid to speak? Where creativity isn't punished and silence isn't rewarded? That doesn't come from better slogans or rebranding your values. It comes from you. Showing up, listening deeply, being willing to change, even when it's uncomfortable. Because culture isn't what you say. It's how people feel. And if the feeling is fear, exhaustion, or resignation, then it's time for something better. You can build that, or you can ignore it. But whatever you choose, people will feel it, and they'll decide to stay, to give, to trust, or not. The question is never just, how do I fix the culture? The real question is, what kind of space do I create by the way I lead? And are people growing in that space, or slowly disappearing inside it? That answer is not on the wall. It's in the room, and it's already speaking. All you have to do is listen.